What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So now that the college football season is over, the time of the NFL draft is approaching, and while I am and will always be a college football guy first, I feel like following the draft is still very much college football related, something that I've always enjoyed tracking and following, and so I plan on covering it to some extent here on the channel as well as we lead up into draft season. So the way that I've decided that I want to do it is, instead of just doing like a full mock draft thing that almost everybody else is already going to do, I'm going to just rank my players at each position, top 5, maybe top 10s depending on the position if there's more guys there. We'll see how I break that down, but just going to go position by position and rank them down. And to me, that's more indicative of actual player rankings in college football than a mock draft will be, because a mock draft is so much determined by team needs and other factors that it becomes way more about NFL type content than it does college football content. And I want to focus on the college football content and on the players individually. And so this video will be the first in that type of series for me. I wanted to start with the quarterbacks. Despite them being a much maligned position group for this year's class, I think there's some underrated prospects here. So let's go ahead and get into my ranking of the quarterbacks for this year's class. And it's going to start off with my number 1 quarterback, Matt Corral. Corral is by far my favorite quarterback in this draft. Pickett is the only guy who I think is even close to him as a prospect. Corral has a legit level NFL arm. He has great accuracy. He has very good velocity on his throws. He can throw the deep ball pretty well. Very good in the intermediate game. More than enough arm talent to go around. He makes all the throws outside the numbers that you would expect him to. Enough velocity, like I said, to fit the ball into tight windows. He has also proven to be an elite improviser, which is where most of his game comes from. He's just absolutely outstanding at making throws off platform and while under pressure, and just improvising when things aren't there. Ole Miss went through a large portion of this season without hardly any talent at the wide receiver spot due to injuries, and also just being Ole Miss. They're not the most talented roster as far as depth goes, and that receiver room got absolutely decimated this year. And he was still incredibly effective despite all of that, especially in the running game. He is a pass-first guy through and through, but he is more than willing to do whatever it takes to win, even if that means he has to run the ball 30-plus times sometimes, which he has done. His toughness is absolutely insane, and that leads me into the next big thing that I love about Corral, which is just his mindset and his intangibles. He is an unquestioned leader of the Ole Miss team. He has been since he got there. His leadership ability is absolutely amazing. It's great. He has proven to be, like I said, more than willing to sacrifice himself to win games for his team, and all of his teammates seem to love him, and I just love the way that he plays the game with that sort of reckless abandon, but in a more controlled sense, where he is willing to run through a wall if that's what it takes to win. And you don't see that from quarterbacks a lot. And you can tell he really does love the game, and he's willing to do whatever it takes, and I love that trait in a quarterback. Now, for some negatives on Corral, I think the first glaring one is his decision-making. He is known as a gunslinger, and that makes for some outstanding touchdown throws, but also it leads to some head-scratching interceptions. And usually when you go from college to the NFL, you don't start throwing less interceptions in the NFL than you were in college. If anything, it goes up quite a lot. And so that is a very real concern for him. Another con I've seen from some people is that he doesn't have prototypical size, but it's not like he's Kyler Murray small or anything like that. He's definitely big enough to be very successful in the NFL with no real issues. He just isn't the 6'4", 240-pound prototype quarterback as far as size goes. And another con that actually relates to the good side of his play style with the improvisation is just that sometimes he tries to make the big play too much, and he doesn't just take what's given to him. He doesn't just take the easy play that's right there in front of him, and that goes hand in hand with his tendency to throw way too many interceptions. However, I do feel like he's improved as far as turnovers go over his last couple of years and his last few games, even as we go late into this past season with him. And he played his entire career in the SEC West, so that's about as close to the NFL as you can really get without actually being in the NFL. And the defenses that he's going to see there are of comparable speed to the NFL. They're not the same by any means, but they're comparable, at least as far as college football is concerned. And so hopefully that is at least some indication that he's used to that level of competition or something similar to that. And so that's not really a concern for him. His level of competition isn't something to be worried about. As far as the comp, he kind of reminds me of Zach Wilson, but a little bit more under control than Zach Wilson. His tendency to look for the big play exclusively isn't quite as drastic as Zach Wilson's is and was. I feel like his intangibles are a lot better than Wilson's too. I feel like he's a better leader, and I like his toughness and his mindset better. Although Wilson, I think, is probably a slightly more overall talented player with a slightly higher ceiling than Matt Corral has. But Matt Corral, my number one quarterback. At number 2, I have Kenny Pickett, and this one's pretty obvious. If Matt Corral's number 1, Pickett needs to be number 2. I have those two very close, and noticeably, Kenny Pickett is noticeably above my number 3 quarterback. Pickett kind of came out of nowhere this season at Pitt, but he really picked up some steam this year, especially heading in late into the season. My favorite thing about Pickett is just that he's kind of a veteran at this point. He's been around the block, and instead of, you see the more common high-level quarterback who doesn't get that much play time, doesn't play very many years in college, and doesn't see a lot of reps because of that, and then goes to the league and struggles early on, Pickett is a little bit different than that. He's been in there for a little bit. He's seen a lot more. He's played a lot more than a lot of your standard prospects will have, and I feel like that's going to be very beneficial for him, especially at the quarterback spot. As far as a day one starter goes, it doesn't help his ceiling and his abilities as an actual prospect, but it does help him as far as just adjusting to the NFL level game, adjusting to the defenses and things like that. A lot of the intangibles and the mentality type of things. Mentally, he is going to be more than ready to adjust to the league, and he's just seen a lot more football than those guys, so that'll help him. Ideally, that'll help him when it comes to diagnosing defenses and things like that, help him pre-snap a lot. And it just makes him feel like a much less volatile prospect as a whole, just because he has more of a tenured type of status. It's a lot less up and down with him. You kind of know what you're going to get as far as him as a prospect. On the field, though, I like his decision-making a lot better than Matt Corral's. I feel like he won't be the kind of quarterback who will outright lose you a game as much as you'll see from a lot of rookies early on. I don't think he's going to be the kind of guy that throws 3-4 picks a lot of times. I think he makes very good decisions with the ball. He's very good at protecting the football. He has very underrated athleticism and mobility. It's not nearly as good as somebody like Matt Corral by any means, but it's not a liability at all. He somewhat reminds me of Daniel Jones in that aspect, at least, although I feel like he is a much better decision maker than Jones, and I feel like his arm talent is a little bit better than Jones as well. Speaking of arm talent, I'd give him slightly above average for the NFL, which isn't a knock at all. It just means he can make just about every throw that you're going to need him to. He's a very accurate passer. He just doesn't have an electrifying arm that's going to shock you or do anything crazy like a Josh Allen arm or, Pat Mahomes arm or anything like that. It's just a good enough average to above average NFL arm. A concern I have for Pickett is the level of competition, and that's not a shot at the ACC by any means. What my point there is that when he did play the high-level defenses of the ACC, like the Clemsons, he struggled a lot more than he did against normal opponents, and you can contribute that somewhat to being at Pitt, so he's out-talented across the board, but he did have a Biletnikoff winner for the best wide receiver in college football this past season at Pitt on his team, so that kind of reduces that argument somewhat. But overall, I do feel like Pickett is the traditional high floor but medium ceiling type of quarterback. He likely won't be anything just absolutely, world breaking or amazing or anything like that. He's not going to be Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, but he could be a similar quarterback to somewhat like we've seen from Mac Jones in this rookie season, who is just a guy who's going to make the right decisions. He's not going to lose you many games by just throwing a lot of interceptions. And if you surround him with good talent and a solid defense, he could be very good and potentially be a playoff starting caliber quarterback. The reason I have him below Corral, though, for me, is just because I don't feel like his ceiling is nearly as high as Corral's, although he feels like the much safer prospect of the two. Which brings me to my number 3 quarterback, which is Sam Howell. And this is somewhat controversial from what I've seen on a lot of other ranking stuff. I have Howell at 3 because Howell is a guy who last year I was really high on, and this year kind of changed that. He went from a potential top pick for me and for a lot of people to a likely second rounder at this point, maybe mid to late first rounder, just because quarterbacks get overdrafted all the time. But I'm still higher on him than most people are. And for me, his most obvious comp is Baker Mayfield. That's a pretty lazy comp in some ways, but also it's still pretty accurate. But I do actually think Howell is much more talented than Baker is. He has a better arm than Baker, he's a little bit bigger than Baker, and he's a little bit more athletic and a slightly better runner than Baker was coming out of college. The difference is that on the field, his success, especially this past season, just doesn't match up to his talent level, and it kind of doesn't make sense in that way. But I think this is largely due to just inconsistency from Howell. That is the biggest flaw in his game. He often displays it too. He needs to improve at reading the entire field at the next level. At this level, he kind of locks onto one receiver or just two receivers, or he'll read one half of the field a lot and not read the other half of the field. Because of that, he'll miss open receivers every now and then. And even when he sees them, a lot of times he will miss open throws, especially if he's out of rhythm and out of sorts that game. He is likely to have a couple throws that just get away from him. But whenever he is on, he is an elite level quarterback. I mean, he is a top level talent when he is on. He just isn't on enough to garner that level of status in this draft class. However, a lot of places I've seen have him as the 5th best quarterback in this class, or even worse, and I think he's better than that. I've got him at 3 because of his ceiling and his constant flashes of brilliance. I mean, if he can just improve the mental side of the game when it comes to reading defenses, and learn how to, when to use his legs, when not to use his legs, and just become more consistent in his mechanics, which will also, therefore, improve his accuracy down in and down out. I think that he could be the best quarterback in the class, but that's a lot of things to work on, and there are a lot of inconsistencies and flaws there, and so that's why I have him at number 3. My number 4 quarterback is Malik Willis, and Malik Willis is a love him or hate him kind of prospect in a lot of ways, because similar to Sam Howell, he has incredible inconsistencies, but he has an absolutely amazing ceiling. His athletic ceiling is outstanding. He likely has the highest ceiling of any quarterback in this class, even more so than Matt Corral and Kenny Pickett, but he also has by far the most question marks. He often misses his wide receivers, or will put them in positions where they have to make tough catches outside of their catch radius, but being at Liberty, you could also chalk that up to some extent that he's at Liberty and there's not enough wide receiver talent there, and so it makes him look worse than he is. But the other argument for that is that he's at Liberty, so he's also playing much lower level talent, and so he hasn't seen what it's like to go up against elite level defenses as much, and so you can make the exact same argument the other way and say that being at Liberty makes him look better than he actually is. So competition is definitely a concern and a question mark for him. His physical gifts, though, are outstanding, but he doesn't really read the defense very well. He struggles to pre-snap, to diagnose coverages. He struggles to throw with anticipation on receivers that aren't obviously open, and the hurry-up offense is really key for him, because when you get into the hurry-up offense, it forces defenses to just check into a base defense, more vanilla coverages, makes things a lot easier for him to read, and it allows him to really utilize his athleticism, which is where his biggest strength will lie. His arm talent is also absolutely elite, but like I said, his accuracy a lot of times will leave a lot to be desired, and he has instances of severe inconsistency. Sometimes he will look like far and away the best quarterback in the class, and other times he will look like an undraftable prospect. He's all over the map. And another issue, like I said, is just that being at Liberty, it's a hard scout. It's really hard to tell if he's being held back by the talent around him, or if in reality the competition that he's playing makes him look better than he actually is. Very, very difficult guy to scout, in my opinion. Overall, though, Willis could turn into an elite-level NFL quarterback if put into the right situation, and if he's allowed to sit early on and learn from a veteran quarterback and learn from a starter, then I think that's a great situation for him to be a developmental type of starter. But if a team takes him and expects him to come in, be a day one starter, and expect him to lead you to the playoffs or anything like that, be a Joe Burrow type day one guy who you can just tell is ready for the league, I think they're going to be very disappointed in his results. Willis is a developmental quarterback, like I said. He would be best served by sitting behind a veteran for a year or two before being handed the franchise, and you're going to need to iron out his consistency issues and his accuracy, as well as improve his ability to read defenses, especially pre-snap, if he's going to reach his full potential. Also, a team is going to have to cater their scheme around him and utilizing his athleticism, because that is what makes him so great. And that brings me to quarterback number 5, and that is Carson Strong. Carson is a quarterback who, in years past, I feel like would have been seen in a much better light. And by years past, I mean like 10 plus years ago. But I feel like he'd have been seen in a much better light then than he is this year, and that's because he fits the mold of a much more traditional pocket quarterback who is a downfield passer who loves to utilize the vertical passing game. His athleticism isn't horrible, but he's not going to be anywhere near a threat to run, especially at the NFL level. He's very good pre-snap, which will translate very well to the NFL, but he does struggle to run through his entire progression, a lot of times due to his lack of mobility. And what I mean by that is that if his first read isn't there, he will very often force the ball to his second or third reads instead of taking a check down and just calmly running through the whole progression, because he knows he doesn't have the mobility to get away from sacks. And so as soon as pressure starts to get on him, he's got to get the ball out. He doesn't have another option. He can't break out of the pocket and extend the play with his legs very well. He has a strong arm and prototypical size. His mechanics can be a bit lazy at times. Occasionally, he lacks consistency. Now, some of that could be Nevada's system. They run an air raid, and so he throws the ball 40-plus times a game a lot, and because of that, you can see later on in the game in particular, you can see his consistency starts to lack and his footwork starts to lack. That's something they're going to want to work on in the NFL, and hopefully he's not going to be asked to throw the ball nearly as much at the next level than he is in college. I think he would benefit from going to a team with a strong offensive line to protect him and a good running game that allows him to take deep shots downfield off of play action, because he does throw a beautiful deep ball, and that's where he really thrives. Also, he could use more possession wide receivers and tight ends. I think that fits his skill set a lot. But I think the problem with that is that because of that play style, he's not going to be very appealing to a lot of new modern NFL offenses who want more mobility, RPO, zone scheme, and hurry-up style offenses. His arm talent is good, but I don't think it's transcendent by any means, and he often just makes poor decisions throwing into coverage that are going to cost him a lot more at the next level than they have so far at the Group of 5 level in college. As far as a comp for him, I see him as sort of a less athletic Carson Wentz, maybe. Slightly less talented arm than Carson as well. He kind of also reminds me of a Phillip Rivers type of quarterback, but basically just any big-bodied pocket passer who's sort of known to be a gunslinger that's going to make some ill-advised decisions every now and then, but in return, he's going to hit a couple deep throws that are going to be very impressive for you. So that's going to wrap up my video of my top 5 quarterbacks for this upcoming draft class, which I think is certainly a down year compared to some of the more recent draft classes that we have seen, but I still think that some of these guys can be real contributors if they go to the right team and don't get severely overdrafted, especially guys like, I think Carson Strong could be a starter in the NFL if he goes to the right situation. Malik Willis could be an all-pro level quarterback, just going to need to develop him, again, right situation. I think Matt Corral and Kenny Pickett could also both be very good quarterbacks. Sam Howell could be the best of the entire group. There is talent here. It's just not as proven and it's not as reliable. A lot more volatile class than what you would be used to seeing. But with that being said, let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about this year's quarterback crop, how you would rank them, which, if any of them, do you think are going to be true NFL caliber starting quarterbacks in the future? Who do you think is the best? Is there anybody I didn't put on the list that you think should be in the top 5? Things like that. Also, if you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a like because it helps out the channel tremendously and it helps it grow a lot. Subscribe to the channel as well for more college football content in the future. I will also be doing a lot more draft content as well. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.